blank. So all of this is a response to the second of the 5 practices. The first practice, of course, was practicing WAG, wonder, attention, and gratitude. The second practice from the second session is nurturing magnanimity. So we're reflecting on experiences in our lives that give us these strong hearts. So Tanner, what are the sorts of things that the folks on Zoom were experiencing in terms of magnanimity?
Well, one of our participants said something very cool, I thought. He said, thinking about how do you practice magnanimity? Well, you need to get out. You need to get out and you got to get in front of people. And church is a place to practice magnanimity. I thought that was very cool. He said, I think there'd be more magnanimity in the world if more people went to church. Well, that's what we all think who go to church. But another participant had a very busy week with lots of guests in her home. Nieces, like who were there on vacation and just to visit, but also a friend who was there because their partner was having like heart surgery or something. So she had both people coming, young people coming, having fun, older people her own age coming because of this thing happening at Marin General, and it became invasive surgery, and she was just talking about how hard it was, and she kept trying to find magnanimity in her heart, and she found if she could think about wonder, attitude, attention, and gratitude, it was a way to get there. But she did admit that she got grumbling. She got into the grumbling, and her partner said to her, magnanimity, Margaret. And there was a lot of discussion about getting out of our own heads about why we think other people do the things they do.
Yeah.
And and we're all old fogies talking about the kids, and everything. And I mean, it's interesting. One person did say something. He talked about his 27 and 24-year-old son and daughter, and he's like, how do you put forward magnanimity in a text? And we know it doesn't happen much on social media. So we talked about that a little bit. I really found it interesting how all the ideas that Christopher's been talking about, in this case, the metaverse, comes weaving back in to these other practices of magnanimity. I caught a cold last Sunday and was laid low pretty all week long, so I didn't get out much. So I didn't get to practice much magnanimity. But I saw the word magnanimous in text. I say in text rather than in print because, these days everything I read is on the internet. So it could have been a tweet, it could have been a blog post, it could have been an article. But I think it was an article by Walter Kern or Matt Taibbi, who had covered the Iowa caucus. And the word magnanimous, which I hardly ever see in writing, right? They used it to describe Trump's victory speech. And if you watch it, he talks about all of his opponents, Ron DeSantis, and he says all these nice things about every single one of them. Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's not normally thought, we don't think of him as a magnanimous guy, but if you watch that victory speech, he was very big-hearted in talking about his opponents. So anyway, that was my only interesting thing about magnanimity this week.
One of the things I point out in the talk that was included in the packet last week is that if you can track the use of a word over time. And at 1800, when people were really practicing virtue, people used the word magnanimous a lot. And it's one of these words that the use has gone down, 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 so that it's hardly ever used at all, which only affirms the fact that it's countercultural. But I think that's a good thing. And sometimes it's good to use a word that's not overused, as I think magnanimous is, because you can really make it your own and it continues to have the power that it initially had. It's not a worn out word, which is part of why I'm attracted to it. Well, wonderful. So practicing WAG, nurturing magnanimity. If you'll go to your packet on the second page, you can fill in today's practice, which is 3 words: stewarding. That's the gerund. Stewarding your halo. So today's practice is stewarding your halo, and we'll talk about each of those words. The words we're going to be focusing on are, you can see this in the outline, leveling, single individual, aware, temporal halo, and then stewardship or custodian, and I'll talk some more about that when we get there. Our first guide for this third practice is Søren Kierkegaard. Søren Kierkegaard was born in Copenhagen in 1813, always a physically frail human being, and he dies young at age 42 in 1855. He rarely leaves the city of Copenhagen. He leaves twice to Berlin for some period of time for education, very occasionally goes out, trips into the country, but not very often. His dad is a peasant who becomes super rich by being a merchant, dies when Søren is a teenager, and Søren inherits a ton of money. He's super smart, highly educated. He almost becomes a professor. He almost becomes a pastor, but becomes neither. Instead, with his money, he's a man around town. He walks around dressed up really fancy. He goes to cafes. He goes to theaters. And then meantime, secretly, he writes absolute oceans of words, publishing a lot of things pseudonymously. And in everything that he's publishing, he's pointing out how other people are flawed, wrong, and not getting it. As a consequence, by the time of his death, he has a few people who are intensely committed to him, and most people hate him. They hate him so much that in the next 2 generations after his death in 1855, nobody names their son Søren. Now, things finally turn around at the beginning of the 20th century. First, the Danes and then the Germans begin to read what he had published and begin to see, oh my gosh, there's something really important going on here. Such that perhaps the greatest German philosopher of the 20th century, Ludwig Wittgenstein, says that Søren Kierkegaard's was by far the most profound mind of the 19th century. So he begins to be rediscovered. It's not until the late 30s that he gets discovered in English. And the person who discovers him and starts to publish him is a man named Charles Williams, who was the head of Oxford Publishing. And he was one of the key inklings, along with J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Charles Williams begins to publish Kierkegaard, and in his history of the Christian church, called The Descent of the Dove, he writes of Kierkegaard, "His sayings will be so moderated in our minds that they will soon become not his sayings, but ours." So in other words, he believes that Kierkegaard's going to make his way into the very bloodstream of how we are as human beings. And I think he's right. I think that is what eventually happened. One of the first essays that Charles Williams publishes and becomes very popular and influential in the late 40s and early 50s is an essay Kierkegaard wrote called The Present Age. And that's the one that we're going to be focusing on. In The Present Age, Kierkegaard writes about leveling, which is society's way to pull down individuals who challenge common sense by, for example, inhabiting Thomas's cosmos rather than the universe or the metaverse. So society doesn't like it when people drift off and start calling attention to things that are different. And Kierkegaard's very aware of that. So here's a direct quote from The Present Age. Kierkegaard writes, "For leveling to take place, a phantom must first be raised, a monstrous abstraction, an all-encompassing something that is nothing, a mirage. And that phantom is the public." Now, Backhouse, who writes a wonderful book, a great introduction to Kierkegaard called Kierkegaard, A Single Life, then adds this commentary. "One of the public's most potent weapons in the war to defend itself against individuals taking their existence seriously is an endless stream of celebrity gossip, manufactured ideological conflict, and opinion presented as facts no one owns, but everyone has. Does that sound familiar?
Can you say that again?
Yes. It's in your packet, by the way, but I'll say it again. One of the public's most potent weapons in the war to defend itself against individuals taking their existence seriously is an endless stream of celebrity gossip, manufactured ideological conflict, and opinion presented as facts no one owns, but everyone has. Does that sound familiar? It does, right? This is kind of the way life seems to be. And he writes this in this essay, The Present Age. Now, the present age is something that he writes after he actually thinks he's done writing. He has completed his authorship. He writes this in a book review. His authorship was an absolute ocean, again, of words that he wrote between 1942 and 1947. And he wrote it in two streams. He wrote a whole series of books that were pseudonymous, so he takes on a pretend personality and indirectly critiques people's practices. And these become very popular. Either or, Fear and Trembling, the unscientific postscript to the philosophical fragments. These are all very popular. That's one stream. And then in another stream, he writes a series of what he calls upbuilding discourses, 18 of them. And hardly anybody reads them. Still, they aren't very well read, often read. I've read them. They're wonderful. They're very powerful, and they're explicitly Christian. The upbuilding discourses, all 18 of them, he dedicates, starting with the first one, to that single individual. And when he first writes the single individual, he means specifically Regine Olsen. The great drama of Kierkegaard's life is that he falls in love with a beautiful young woman who loves him back, and they become engaged, and he realizes during the engagement that he is not worthy to marry Regine. And so he breaks off the engagement, yet continues to love her, and she continues to love him. So when he turns to becoming an author and writes the first of the upbuilding discourses, that single individual is code for Regine. As he continues to write, he realizes that he is only ever writing to that single individual, not just Regine, but whoever the reader happens to be. So if you are reading Kierkegaard, Kierkegaard believes that he is writing directly for you, Bruce, and no one else. He even gives instructions for how to read him. He says, slow down and read me out loud, as though these are your own thoughts. He's very deeply engaged with each person as a single individual. And this is the key thing about how he operates. At the same time that he writes The Present Age, he writes, reflecting on his authorship, the crowd, leveling the public, the crowd is really what I have made my polemical target. And it was Socrates who taught me. I want to make people aware so that they don't waste their lives and fritter them away. The best description of Kierkegaard, and this really was his self-understanding, is that he wanted to be the Socrates of Christendom. He wanted to, in all of those pseudonymous things, he takes on a person who isn't quite a Christian and doesn't quite understand what Christians are and questions what Christians actually think that they're doing. That's why he made them so uncomfortable, just like Socrates made the Athenians so uncomfortable. He was masterful at that. Why? He wanted to make us, his readers, aware. He wanted to have us be strong enough to avoid the monstrous abstraction of the public. Well, I'd like to give you an exercise to help you this week become aware, become a single individual, not get swallowed up in that monstrous abstraction of the public. And it's stewarding your halo. Now, the notion of each person having a halo is a temporal halo, is one that emerges in the early 20th century. And among the people who embrace it and make it real for people is the novelist and essayist Virginia Woolf. And in the 1920s, Virginia Woolf, in an essay called Modern Fiction, writes about the halo this way. She writes, and again, this is in your packet, "Life is not a series of gig lamps symmetrically arranged. Life is a luminous halo, a semi-transparent envelope surrounding us from the beginning of consciousness to the end. Is it not the task of the novelist to convey this varying, this unknown and uncircumscribed spirit, whatever aberration or complexity it may display, with as little mixture of the alien and external as possible?" Have any of you read Virginia Woolf? If you have, there's something really eerie about the way that she portrays human consciousness, and unlike anything else. You really feel when she's writing that she's got, in this three-dimensional way, what it's like to inhabit a body in time and interact with others, and the sort of almost random thoughts that come in, some of them really sharp, some of them fuzzy, some of them hopes for the future, some of them almost ghosts from the past, some of them an awareness of like what's to either side of you. A halo, a temporal halo, not a sort of rigid chronological plot. That's what our life is actually like. Contemporary philosopher James K.A. Smith picks up this image of a temporal halo in his book that was published 2 years ago called How to Inhabit Time. It's a short book, pretty accessible, quite profound. Our Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, loved the book so much that he bought a copy for all of the bishops in England to read and check out. And temporal halo is one of his primary teachings about how to inhabit time. Again, he's picking it up like Virginia Woolf did from Edmund Husserl. And what he claims, and what I find really intriguing and I think is true, is that each of us has a temporal halo, and our temporal halo is as unique to us as our fingerprint or our gait. It is who we are, and it is unique to us. It is how we are, a single individual. And Smith is very alert to the ways in which our history, and particularly our family history, shapes who we are, and the ways in which becoming alert to the ways that our family history shapes us is part of growing in wisdom and inhabiting time and being a single individual. He suggests that our family history is like an IV, and I picture an IV going right into the back of my neck, that provides us both nourishment and poison. And part of being mature is being alert to the ways in which our family history gives us both nourishment and poison. He gives a really winsome example of a way in which he successfully inhabited time. He talks about the quiet joy of celebrating a 31st wedding anniversary with his wife, just the two of them. Presumably the 30th was more of a party or something, but it was just the two of them. And he's very honest throughout the book about his own personal struggles with family systems and mental health, and how often he has to go to therapy and how often he and his wife have to go to therapy. And he mentions that it was a quiet triumph when they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary, because both of them came from broken families. And here they were, having done the work of rid themselves to some degree of the poison of broken families, and have a triumph of love and faithfulness in their 31st wedding anniversary. Again, very alert to how the family has been both a source of nourishment and sometimes of poison as well. I want to propose a practice for this week, stewarding your temporal halo, which is unique, like your fingerprint. And I would like you to be less like me and more like Jessica. And what I mean by that is when I leave the house in the morning, when I go out the front door with my backpack, I go right to my Honda, I open up the door, I throw the backpack down. Before I've even finished closing the door, I've already put my foot on the accelerator and I'm pushing the button to start the car. And I put on my safety belt. I look around quickly. I haven't looked at any of the instruments, and I'm backing up to get to church, right? That's me. Now, Jessica is about to be a pilot. And I'm assuming that when she gets into the airplane, she does not behave like I behave with the car. Like, you're looking at the instruments, you're checking everything, because if you run out of gas half hour into your flight, you're screwed. Dead. Yeah. I run out of gas part of the way to church. I just pull over to the Shell station that's, right by my house. I'm suggesting that every morning this week, you be like Jessica and be a very attentive steward to your temporal halo. I want you to picture your temporal halo like there are Renaissance paintings of saints and with halos. And Jesus gets a very special halo to make it clear that this baby is Jesus, where he has 4 bands that are going out like a cross, one behind, one ahead, one to the right, and one to the left on his halo. I want you to monitor your halo and think about your past, your 4 grandparents. I want you to think very specifically about who they were and how they influenced you, both in good and negative ways. Now, I have been doing this every morning for the last 6 months, and I was reflecting a lot on my 4 grandparents, and I realized that each one of them gave me a very specific gift. So from Pop, I got the gift of faith. From Noni, I got the gift of playfulness. From Button, I got the gift of wit. And from Van, I got the gift of strength. And I got the poison of a sometimes seething anger. And I have to acknowledge that. I got nourishment, and then I got a little poison too. So I wonder if you might reflect on your grandparents and think about what's the nourishment that you received from each one of them, and identify a poison or 2 that you received from those folks as well. That's part of who you are. That's part of your temporal halo. That's part of your fingerprint. That's part of you as a single individual, and that's you becoming aware. Now, to my right, you can make it your left if you want, but I always make it to my right, I think about my family. I think about my mom, my dad, my 2 uncles, my cousin, my sister, my niece, my nephew, and I think about my 2 sons. I think about my blood. I pray for them, I reflect on them just a little bit. I think about my wife and her family, and then I go to my left, and I think about the people that are close to me in my life. I think about my friends, I think about my colleagues, I think about my parishioners, I think about the inmates that I'm in touch with on death row, I think about the leaders that I follow, shoot up a little prayer for them. You see what I'm doing here? Behind, to the right, my family, to the left. I'm thinking about each one of them. Now, one thing to be aware of, and this is in keeping with our transcending contempt, is that it's very likely that if you're like me, among those folks are people across the political spectrum. And these are people that you love and that are important to you. So part of why this is an exercise in transcending contempt is that you got to think about these particular individuals and what it is that you love about them, wonder about them, pay attention to them, be grateful for them. Finally, hope. And here I want to give you just some words to chew on. 5 of them. Anchor, love, wonder, attention, and gratitude. First, a wonderful scriptural definition of hope is that it's a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. That comes from Hebrews. And it's a good image to think about how you as a single individual do not get swallowed up by that monstrous abstraction, the public, right? That's surging around us all the time. If you're anchored in hope, you're less likely to get caught up in it. And then begin to understand what hope is. Hope is akin to love. Why? Because it's a desire. Hope is akin to wonder. Why? Because you cannot fully describe or fully know what it is that you hope for. Not knowing exactly what it is that you hope for is a feature, not a bug, of hope. Hope is akin to attention. Why? Because hope is unhurried, as is attention. If you're paying full attention, you're actually inhabiting hope. If you are multitasking and, as 12-step programs say, sped up, you're not living in hope. Sped up means that kind of rushed feeling that you're in, and that can often be a warning sign if you're an addict that you're about to use again or something. The practice is to slow down. Same thing, if you're multitasking and if you're rushed, you're not living in hope. To abide in hope is to be unhurried, and it is to be attentive. And then finally, and I love this definition, hope is akin to gratitude because it is labor towards a gift. Right? You're doing the work. It's hope isn't passive. But the thing that's going to emerge, you're prepared for it to be a gift, to come in a surprising way. And again, if you're inhabiting Thomas's cosmos, you understand that it's actually all gift all the way down. So gratitude is a sign also that you're living in hope. A final note. I had initially said for myself that what I'm doing as I do this checking all the instruments practice each morning is being a good steward. And I was thinking of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verse 1, when he says, think of us in this way, as stewards of God's mysteries. And I love that image of being a steward. Whatever you have is a gift from God, and you are just a steward of it for your lifetime, capable of sharing it with others. Beautiful. But I realized as I was doing this practice more and more that something else was going on. And it finally occurred to me when I was waiting in the TSA check line at SFO, and all of a sudden somebody announced, "Make way for the custodian." And the custodian came with this cart that had mops and toilet paper and trash bags. And I'm like, you know what? That's what I'm doing in the morning. I am making sure that the crap isn't accumulating, that things are clean, that things are in decent order. So sometimes it can just feel like you're just attending to things and making sure they're neat and in decent order before you go out and face the day that you are about to face. So, stewarding your halo. That's the practice. Are there any questions? Yes, Chris Hammond.
I'm not quite sure the concept of hope as being active, because traditionally hope is considered to be something, I hope things happen, but it's kind of shown as being the antithesis of action.
Yeah, that's why I was challenged and I embraced this definition of labor toward a gift.
So what kind of, how do you labor when you're hoping?
Well, it depends what you're hoping for, right? Hoping for reconciliation, hoping for mercy, hoping for a better future for America.
I see, so just in the act of hoping, you're being active.
Well, that the act of hoping is provoking a certain labor in you that's headed towards this thing that you can't quite fully picture.
Okay.
But you're not just sitting on your duff hoping and not doing anything.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, hope leads to the action. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And that as you're living in hope, you're laboring, but you're laboring not towards something that you utterly control and can picture entirely. It's this thing that will emerge as a gift in a way that you're prepared to be pleasantly surprised. Yes, Francis.
It might be helpful to think of hopelessness as the antithesis, because hopelessness tends to have us be inactive and passive and shut down, whereas when we're hopeful, we do take some action. It might not be, we might not associate it with the hope, but when I look at it as the opposite of hopelessness, then it becomes clear to me that hope allows for action.
Yeah, no, that's well put. Francis, did everybody hear that? That hopelessness tends more to inactivity than hopefulness. And if we look at the opposite, that can help find that place in us. Let me point out that this is now the second virtue that I'm exploring with you. It was magnanimity last week. We're going to have 3 virtues. The last one's going to be regard. So I hope that that's one of your takeaways. It's 10 o'clock right now. Is everybody in for another maybe 5 minutes or so of exploring questions? On one hand, I want to try to honor the time restrictions. On the other hand, I also, while it's all fresh, I want to make sure that we all have a sense of what we're doing as we go out to be a good steward or custodian of our temporal halo. Other questions? Yes, Bill.
Yeah, I don't know how useful, I offer this as a challenge, how useful it is to think of the sort of the unfinished parts of our heritage, of what we've inherited as poison. Very difficult to integrate poison with goodness, and I don't think that they're really 2 discrete things. I think it's a unitary thing. Did I say how do you forgive? You can't forgive poison.
My struggle with the seething anger that I inherited from my veteran of World War II grandfather is that I know that the intensity that seething has also been a gift to me, and that it's enabled me to accomplish things. It's been a fuel of ambition for me, but it's also overcome me sometimes in ways where the intensity has not served me well. So I don't deny. He gave me the gift of strength, but it also came with this anger. So how do I live with the strength but without being consumed by the anger? So I hear what you're saying, but I think a lot of those things have a dark side to them, and if we're not honest about that dark side, we're stuck.
I just think maybe it's more honest not to make it a discrete thing. I mean, it might be more accurate to see it as something that's rather than as poisonous, something that's not quite right yet. That's something that's not yet developed yet, perhaps.
Okay.
In any event, I personally find that helpful.
That's a good question to live with this week. What do we do with those dark things that we've inherited from our grandparents? Because we're all mixed bags, right? I mean, as a Christian, I just think we're all sinners. And so we're all pouring out to people a mixed thing. There's only one person that's ever been purely good, maybe two, just Jesus. And the rest of us are a mixed bag, I think. Any other questions? Yes, Pat.
You're suggesting that the exercise for this week is to steward our halo. Think about what's on the right, what's on the left, what's in our past, what's in our present, and really have that conscious in our thoughts.
That's right. And to do it specifically as an exercise first thing in the morning, like with your cup of coffee. Sit down and take 5 minutes or 10 minutes and just sort of monitor, just like Jessica checking all of her monitors in the airplane. It's like, before I take off for this day, let me remember my 4 grandparents. Let me think of my family. Let me think of my friends. Let me chew on this definition of hope. Now I'm ready to go out with my temporal halo, having gotten clear about who I am as a single individual. I'm aware. I'm not going to get swallowed up by the public. I don't want to be that kind of person. I want to be different in a good way. That's what I'm proposing. Bruce and then Janie.
So are we acknowledging the poison and leaving it at that, or are we trying to overcome the poison and get to a better place with it?
I think the first step is acknowledging it. To me, it was a great insight this last summer to identify my grandfather's anger as seething. Once I had that word, I was able to live with it and figure out what to do with it. But I needed to label it. So sometimes just labeling it is a very powerful first step, and not assuming that you can jump to a solution, but just know that, like, okay, that's what I got to live with. And part of the beauty of showing up every morning to this exercise is that it'll slowly probably be revealed to you what's a healthy way forward with this inheritance. So if you do nothing but identify a word for the 4 gifts of your 4 grandparents, that's awesome. And then maybe the dark side can come later. It's not likely to come, or it didn't all come at once for me. It was showing up regularly and having it slowly be revealed. Bruce.
Not unsurprisingly, I had a very similar thought, and that is, I have some specific concerns about particularly one of my grandparents, but I haven't really delved into it enough to start labeling them. One of my grandfathers I didn't know at all, but I think a good exercise would be to go back. I get it easier to do that with my parents, but to go back one more generation and try to take the 4 grandparents and put some sort of, how did they affect me? Positively, negatively, or maybe some, to what I think Jenny's saying, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I haven't defined that yet. And my other challenge is I have to put this on top of my 20 minutes of gratitude in the morning.
It can be part of it. It's just part of, to me, it's just part of my prayer life. It's like, okay, I'm going to do my halo thing now. It's just an exercise. So try it out for a week. If it works, great. And if not, I mean, with all of these practices, it's like, try it for a week, and if it works for you, super, keep it up. If not, oh well, try another thing. But give it a shot for a week. That's the invitation. other questions about stewarding your halo? Great. All right. Well, next week it'll be good and evil. We're going to talk about good and evil. So look forward to having you all back next week. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube or Zoom, wonderful to have you with us, and glad that you're along for the adventure. And again, I just want to thank Judy in particular for giving us the spread. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Tanner. Thank you, Mike. Thanks to all of you for coming and engaging, and look forward to continuing the adventure next week. Yeah, Mr. Rogers is awesome. He's good. He's magnanimity personified, isn't he? All right.